Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to join the OUP's Education Leadership Forum. I'm your MC, Mason Leung from OUP Hong Kong. We are excited to have Mr. Chris Geary, CEO of BSD Build Something Different Education, to talk about implementing and teaching redefined core literacies and new models of assessment. Chris is an education entrepreneur, investor, and nonprofit leader focusing on developing and scaling initiatives and technologies that lower barriers and reduce inequalities in assessing the opportunities of the future of work. He founded BSD Education in 2013, an educational software and curriculum provider that enables teachers in schools to teach students digital skills during the lessons. BSD has grown to work with schools around the world and has teams located in Hong Kong, Thailand, the Philippines, the United States. Chris has also contributed a lot in Hong Kong through different nonprofit initiatives. Chris has been recognized by the Enterprising Young Breeds Awards 2007, the World Economic Forum 2011, and was nominated as one of the top 10 outstanding up-and-coming young people in Hong Kong 2018 by the Happy Life Education Foundation. Without further ado, let us welcome Chris to kick off his sharing.
Thank you, Maison, and good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to have a little bit of a look at some of the work and some of the research that myself and my organization has been doing around the redefinition of core literacies and some of the opportunities for new models of assessment. During the presentation, I will also make reference, of course, to some, call it immediate steps or immediate and implementable steps. Please note as well, where things that I'm suggesting, in a presentation, I'll always suggest things that can be done in the absence of expenditure. So these are all things that can be done and used for free. So first of all, I want to set the scene. When we think about the core literacies today, we're really still talking about those original two literacies of first language and numeracy, or in some cases in Hong Kong, Chinese language and mathematics, in other places in the world, English language and mathematics. But we've still got those two core literacies. And you can see the image in the background on this slide. We've got many areas of education really ready to go. But one of the reasons why I like this image is it still feels a little bit like we're constricted by the way we define our core literacies, and we're still strapping the horse to the cart, in a manner of speaking. I'm not saying, and you're not going to hear me say today that we should rid ourselves of the existing core literacies of first language and numeracy. That's not something that I believe, but where I feel that these core literacies struggle nowadays is that there is a lack of contextual relevance, and it's not necessarily easy to build the bridge for students, bearing in mind, obviously, students are learning these literacies from a very young age to an age that immediately precedes either their higher education or the workforce. And it's very difficult in the way that these topics are taught and learnt within education for that relatable bridge to be built to the way that students see their lives in the future. At the same time, the outcomes of learning from these core literacies of language learning and numeracy are not well understood in the real world. So what that means is when students express what they've learned in a system that is defined by this current core literacy, it's very difficult for students to explain what they've learned, and for someone who's lived in the real world, who's lived in the world of work for a long time, to understand what they can do with that. When we look at what is the world outside of education asking for, what is the world saying, I'm going to quote some information here from McKinsey's Global Institute. A reason why I like McKinsey's Institute for Information is I find that they do a really good job of explaining their research process and where their findings have come from. So if you are looking at data around future of work, I would recommend MGI's work in this. What we're seeing very, very clearly and spelled out very clearly is technological skills and social emotional skills are going to be incredibly dominant in the needs of the workforce in the future. Within technological skills, again, very dominant on the basic of IT, and then those higher level advanced IT and technology skills. This is really around creating solutions with technology. I'm going to talk a little bit about automations, where we're looking at social emotional skills, the increasing importance of what it is to be human and the value proposition of the human. And that being something that the machine will not automate, but that positioning not really being at the moment well prepared in traditional education, and possibly being hindered by a narrow definition of core literacy. There was a study this year published by Accenture that I would like to highlight. It's their Technology Vision 2021, but there was a feature in here that I found interesting as well. So when you're thinking about, you'll be hearing about, digital skills or technology skills, things like concepts of STEM, STEAM, coding have become very popular in education. What that's translating to in the workforce for the majority of jobs, we're not talking about billions of software engineers. We're talking about people going to their careers in the future and being able to be provided with a suite of technology options and having the confidence, the competency to select from that suite of options themselves and individually choose to create a solution either internally for a customer. Those solutions will in the future potentially go to become bigger and join in with the corporate process. But businesses are very aware as well that corporate process in itself is a hindrance to their own innovation. And so when you're thinking about technology, it's not just about every student being able to write the most complicated algorithms or the most complicated software. It's about students being able to know what they know, to understand what they're good at and passionate about, and to individually apply that. You've heard me mention digital skills a few times already. I just wanted to take a second to tell you what I mean by a digital skill, and also why I'm not going to tend to refer to technology skills and social emotional skills separately or distinctly in this presentation. When I look at the needs of the workforce in the future and those digital skill requirements, we classify technology and social emotional and soft skills all under that bracket of digital skills. Part of that is a reflection of the fact that there is a significant demand for the hard skills of technology. And there are infinite numbers of pathways, and the world of hard skills is becoming more and more complicated. The reflection of that is that as an individual in the future, when our students are going to the world in the future, they're going to be going to a world where they're not going to be the master of everything. They're not going to be a jack of all trades. They're going to be able to look at a suite of different technologies, understand how those technologies and methodologies are used, select what they can do, understand how they're going to collaborate with other people with other technologies. And that's where that social emotional, that soft skill comes in. There's going to be huge amounts of problem solving with ever more complicated problems. And so the technology and the social emotional and soft skills are inherently connected. I want to make reference to values as well here in relation to digital skills. None of us are a stranger to some of the challenges of technological solutions that can grow very fast and can cause significant challenges in society. And we want young people to be coming through education under the bracket of their digital skills with a strong sense of that curiosity, that resilience, that empathy that will allow them to create socially responsible solutions and critically examine the success of their solutions on a long-term basis. So when I'm talking digital skills, understand that I'm referring to the context of technology, soft, social, emotional, and values. So I want to take a quick look at Hong Kong at the moment. So I took a snapshot of some of the DSE data. A reason why I took DSE is it's readily available information, but at the same time, you know, that DSE period of a young person's life, and I'll reference this again in a minute, is where a student is really starting to turn their focus towards what's next. Where am I going after school? You know, this is where that guidance becomes so critical. And where if we're going to be making those cross-curricular, interdisciplinary, may I say transdisciplinary connections to the real world, digital skills are going to be a massively important component of that. But at the moment, where we see ICT in the DSE, we only see about a 10% student uptake. Only about 11.5% of schools have design and applied technology offered. So we're still not even really reaching 10% of DSE graduating students with ICT. And if you think about as well, students who've done it in junior secondary school, then they've completely missed out their senior secondary period. They might miss out university as well, which is another 4 years, where this doesn't flow through and where students aren't able to, from an earlier age, contextually apply that technology under their own agency, then they could miss 7 years of this. And this is suggesting that maybe 90% of graduates in Hong Kong, by the time they're getting to the workforce, haven't really had a strong experience of digital skills for 7 years. And I just want to reflect another point here in relation to automation. So when we look at why I would look at the entirety of the class of young people and of a graduating class from high school, why I'm not necessarily just looking at the university graduates. You know, one of the things that we're going to see, and again, I'll explain this a little more in a second, is we're seeing a greater amount of automation. So the roles that do not require problem solving, don't necessarily require those soft skills, are becoming more and more easy to automate. So the human will be disintermediated from the opportunity. You can see here that the early scenario technical potential for complete automation is 2065, which isn't actually that far away when we consider the broader data where we're already behind in the needs of the workforce. And we're looking at when we did the difference between the technical and the implementable automation, 2095, the theoretical total implementable automation. Now, what we're going to see with that is that the positions that are there in the future that are not automatable are those that are going to mirror those most human of traits. The higher level problem solving, the higher level critical examination that roles will require are the ones that are going to be there. Now, the thing is, though, when we think about our economies, when we think about our society, we need everyone in employment. And actually, when we think about aging societies, we not only need everyone in employment, we need everyone earning more money, because we need society to receive more tax receipts. And when society receives more tax receipts, we can afford to take care of the growing proportion of society that's not able to be in the workforce or have aged out of the workforce. So there's a major economic imperative to this. And at the moment, not only of young people joining the workforce, we can see on that previous slide, 90% of young people potentially not having had this experience, but also that we need 100% of the young people in the workforce with this experience so that they can meet the workforce and the economic needs of society. So this is a really big piece. And when we're looking at the issue here, we're seeing automation and technology pinching, I use an hourglass here, pinching on our society as we currently have it. And when you push something in the middle, you either force things to go up under pressure or they go down. Where they go up, then what we have is the higher level employability. Where they go down, we've got automated positions. And in the middle is the area where at the moment, we're not quite sure. Are we going to be moving people up, or are we going to be moving people down into this middle bucket of roles? If we move people down, then this is what it'll look like. The purple is unemployment. If we move people up, the purple is more gainfully employed, more socially mobile, more able to build an economically well-structured society for the future. And this is these new and evolved skills. The talent deficit of Hong Kong at the moment is said to be 263,000 and headed for 746,000 by 2030. And this is driven by a misalignment between students coming through, people in the workforce not having these technological skills. It'll cost us 219 billion by 2030 if we don't sort it out. The shortfall's growing at about 48,000 students, positions per year. We're graduating 52,000. Now, I don't want to oversimplify, but there is a strong connection and possibility between those. So what might be a solution here when we're thinking about this, the idea of redefining core literacy, and how can it help with this issue? I said at the beginning, I'm not talking about stopping on language literacy and numeracy. I would say to you that the digital technologies and digital skills of the world are an excellent conduit. They're an excellent conduit through which the learnings of traditional core literacies can flow to be more relatable for young people into the future. So I think, one, when we're thinking about digital literacies, I would put forward to you that digital literacy is the third core literacy that needs to be considered. I would put forward to you that it needs to be considered in a way that will relate the learnings of the current core literacies, allow the learnings of them to flow through the context of digital literacies to meet the real world. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what that could look like. At the same time, we need this digital literacy, these digital skills, to be flowing across education. They need to be present in that top tier of education, that senior secondary. And the only way we're going to do that at the moment is that if we make them core. If we look at Hong Kong, by the time a student is 15 years old, there's a 1 in 10 chance that they'll choose to continue with their digital skills studies. But there is a 100% chance that they will continue with their language learning and numeracy studies. And that's it's a misbalance that needs to be addressed. So I want to, on my next slide, I'm just going to look at, the current Hong Kong school curriculum and the Hong Kong school guidance. There is already provision. When we look at the curricular guides, when we look at the curricular creation guides, there's already provision within that. You can see technology education is sitting as a core learning area within junior secondary school. We've got values and attitudes for responsibility, for integrity, for care to others. We've got within a Class A elective in the DSE, we already have ICT sitting and design technology. However, as I said, we're talking about a 1 in 10 chance. But what I'm saying here is there's a provision. In the United States, to do a comparative, there was a document created in 2016 called the United States US Computer Science Framework for K-12. And that document also, very similarly to the outline for the Hong Kong school curriculum, outlined that through middle school, this kind of broad-based application of technology is of value. And then for students, once they're into their senior school, their high school years, taking a bit more depth. Okay, so we're seeing that also reflected in the where the Hong Kong's educational authorities have come And as I quoted, I like the fact that there is a focus around STEM, there is a focus around technology education, the values and attitudes are stated. So the license is clearly being given, the way is clearly being paved. Where I find it challenging is when I look at the outputs of that. Within general studies, I'm finding that the technology learning or the digital skills is coming out very, very, very diluted. The referenceable models or the projects are very out of date, and they're not catching up or keeping up with the world of the future. At the same time, within the core subjects I've already stated that there's a 1 in 10 chance or less that a student would choose to study ICT or design and technology in schools where it's actually offered. So what might we do about this, or what might it look like? So when I think about digital skills development, right at the beginning of primary, we see students, young people are such a sponge. And this is really a time when they can build some of those foundational knowledges, okay? So when we're thinking about digital skills in primary, we want students to be understanding real technology. And these real technologies are now very accessible, but we want them to build that knowledge in primary school. But what we want with that is not necessarily going too deep, but we want students to be encouraged, to be excited about the ways that they can apply technology in what they do and in the outcomes and outputs of their learning. And we want to build in primary school right at the beginning that sense of agency. Once students go up to a junior secondary level, we want them to really use that, carry on that excitement and that sense of agency through their application of digital skills in their junior secondary or their middle years of education. If we lose those students at high school, if we lose them at the final point or at university, we already want students to be focused on that application and understanding in the big world of technology, what is it that benefits them the most or that they're most interested in and they're most going to be willing to learn for the rest of their lives. Once we get to senior secondary, once we get to high school, I would say to you that, a lot of the time in education, as soon as we get into the high school arena, we're finding computer science. And computer science becomes the discrete manifestation of the learning of digital skills. A challenge is computer science is really dedicated to nurturing software engineers, which is a very small percentage of young people and is a very small percentage of people in the world in general. Whereas the entirety of the future of work is requiring people in any career, any role, to have a form of digital competency and digital skill that they can take forward with them. So I think what I would say is to really reinforce that message in senior secondary, to really say to students, look, in junior secondary, you've learned about your applications, you've learned about your passions. In senior secondary, now go out and find out the context under which those appear. The real world context, the broadening horizons of community. Remember that in primary school, young people are very much focused around the context of their immediate family, their immediate friends, their school. As students are going into junior secondary, they become more their local community, maybe their country level. And then in senior secondary, young people are looking at the world. And so we need to, again, gradually plan to expand the context of application and the context of application for the passions that young people have discovered. Now, what are some of the ways that this can be done? Because another challenge is I quite often find that, where students have built those, if students can develop some of those knowledge-based skills earlier on in their times, you'll find many of the students where they connect with an area of technology and they begin to enjoy it and they have an ability to apply it under agency. They have choice of when they use technology. You'll find that students will go through a lot of discovery themselves. But some of the things that you can look to do as an educator is take those 5-minute slots in your lessons. Many of us who've taught students in the past. We've had those 5-minute points of a lesson where we're saying, oh, well, what should we do just to fill the end of the class? So where you can find resources, single-click resources that demonstrate the learning, the technology connection to the learning, and the manifestation in the real world. Collect those resources. There's many, many video and written resources online that really demonstrate the connection of learning to the real world. And in many cases, you'll find this is going to be a collection, whether you're sitting listening to me as a core subject teacher, or whether you're listening to me as a technologist, you'll find that in most of the times that relatable connection, the conduit or the contextual conduit will be digital skills through to the professional world. And so look for filling that 5 minutes with a real world relatable connection. When you do those, share those. We heard anyone who is watching this presentation and who visited the forum's opening yesterday, we heard many of the speakers yesterday talking about the importance of community. When you find those resources, when you find those relatable connections, share those with your community. And I would urge you not only to share them with your educational community, share them with the parents of your educational community, but also where you have friends and others who work outside of the world of education, share the connections and the relatable context with them as well, so that you can begin to build some of that bridge between the world of work and the world of education. Where students have had digital skills throughout education, and you know as an educator that at all times the students in front of you will have those, don't be afraid to encourage the students to create work for you in different media. Give them a choice of how they do that. And at the same time, not only allow them to do that, but perhaps when work is shared in different types of media, share the work that has been shared with other teachers who might even be able to provide a secondary appraisal. Okay, and this is about that. This will not be possible without that community developing. But it is about educators of different subjects, of different cores of learning, sharing that. But one of the only ways that we're necessarily going to maybe have the strong enough sense of license for different forms of media of work to be shared amongst different teachers is where those digital literacies and digital technologies are brought into the core of learning, and where they become a critical part of learning all the way through the journey of education. As an educator, the technology being used by the students can be intimidating. I'm totally willing to admit that my 2-year-old daughter learns more faster and retains far more on a daily basis than I definitely do in a month. And as adults, we know that, we're not as good at learning as younger people and as our students. So although the technology and the use of technology might be intimidating, if you can, I would urge you to let go of that, because you'll find in the real world and with companies that right or wrong isn't really a concept in relation to a technological solution. If a student tried to create a piece of work using a piece of technology or a digital skills discipline, and they weren't 100% successful in their application of the digital skills, then digital methodology would say to you, well, what you want that student to be able to do is just simply explain what they found difficult, explain where they felt that the media through which they created their solution has succeeded or failed, but there isn't really a right or wrong answer. So for you, I would, as an educator, I'd urge you to release yourself from that fear of failure And to really say, who are you in that room? What do you bring to that table? You're not the technologist in the room most of the time. But what you have got is you've got a broader perception of the context of the world than your student. And that's just something as an adult you naturally have. It's something that students will generally not be able to supersede the simple life experience of an adult in the room. And so for that, you are, as an educator, the king of the context or the queen of the context in that classroom. Focus on that. Focus on, again, that community. Focus on understanding the way that the world outside of education is changing, and focus on challenging your students with context, and let the technology side take care of itself. Don't fear right or wrong in technology. There's another piece that I think schools and educators could really look at doing in supporting both the growth of future readiness, but also where digital skills can become a core. Preparing for that, I think, is really thinking about taxonomy. Okay, and what that means is there's this huge mismatch between what we learn in education and what people in the outside world understand of what is learned. And then in the world of education, there's a mismatch in understanding between what educators understand and what the world of work or the world outside of education talks about. And so again, something here, you know, it would be a great thing if this is something that can be agreed on an international level. But as a starting point in your schools, start to understand the taxonomy, so the language that you use. Compare it with the language in the outside world. Use your community to do this. And then in areas, do the work to line up the way that the outcomes of the learning and the understanding of the real world is connected. So that means that you as the educator might make an adjustment in the way that you express some of the outcomes of learning. As employers, people will be able to better understand what young people have learned. Remember we said earlier, the higher level roles, the roles where the taxonomy is so misunderstood, are the roles that are needed in the future. And so we need those digital skills, language uses to be present across our traditional cores, hopefully with our unified core with digital literacies. And we need those to be able to be commonly understood between the world of work and the world of educators. And it could be that the career guidance team within your schools is the linchpin of this part of your community. Where any of you would like to read a document that I've found particularly helpful in some of the research I've done around skills, competencies, the capabilities that those demonstrate, and a language structure that is understood in the real world, the Human Capability Standards Reference Model by the Institute for Working Futures in Australia is a really strongly and a really good example. And this can be something as simple as, where you've got mathematical learning and students are studying algebra, relate the role of algebra to algorithm, maybe algorithm to software or to cybersecurity. And so you're getting that relationship between, but really it's about just making a taxonomic connection, not necessarily having to redefine what you're teaching in that core literacy. So if we can say that there might be, I would say that there is a really strong case for incorporating digital literacy as one of the three pillars of core literacy. What is an opportunity, but also a hindrance to this happening? Because a challenge with some of with curriculum when, where digital isn't its own core literacy and the sole route to implementing is integrated to traditional subjects, you don't have an assessment mandate for doing that as an educator. You know, you are still beholden to the end of year exam, the results of that exam, and it can be quite stressful to simply take away learning from that to put something else new, and then for that to be potentially detracting from what is actually the accessible part of a student's educational journey. And so, you know, I think that actually incorporating digital skills into core of literacy gives an opportunity. One, it gives the defined time for this to happen. But I'm not saying to shunt the other out of the way or to change the way that the other is done or to even get rid of every form of examination. I think with the digital skills as well, incorporating them to the core of learning is an opportunity for an evolution in the way that we conduct the highest level of assessment in education. At the moment, that's hugely dominated by summative tests. It's hugely dominated by final exams. But digital skills have never been traditionally or summatively assessed. It doesn't really make sense to assess digital skills at a summative point. I mean, you're probably all fully aware of the inequalities that grow because of the ability for someone to have such huge determination on the outcome of their entire educational journey by their ability to walk into a room and perform under one short period of examination. But if you think about digital skills in this constant state of evolution, there's no point in testing someone's, call it rote or examine proficiency at one moment in time. It doesn't prove anything because whatever you test that day, a month later, it's changed. I would go so far as to say it's inappropriate to test that because it's wasted time. Another factor is that the whole concept of completion to technology is somewhat alien. Where you are testing people summatively in relation to digital skills, then what you're actually testing something on the basis of completion. But then when we look at what happens in the real world, when we create a solution to a problem, we create a solution that evolves, it iterates. We create technology and software that constantly changes. So why would I base education upon completion when the world of work doesn't complete things anymore? And so I think the value of completion and what completion represents in education needs to be reconsidered. Now, where digital skills can become a core literacy in themselves, we have an opportunity to maintain some of the existing system with language learning and numeracy and those summatively test pathways for now. But we have a huge opportunity to formatively and to non-summatively assess all of the outcomes of learning as they occur throughout learning and making an overall determination with evidence of the suitability of someone or the future readiness of someone based on their digital skills. What about micro-credentials? I think some of you might be thinking, well, you know, we've seen people can leave school and after that they can do micro-credentials. Bear in mind that less than half of students go to university. In many economies, less than half of those that go to university graduate from university. Remember that we need everyone from high school to be taking these higher level positions. So, micro-credentials is a way of providing a recognizable certificate for a smaller size of course. But there are problems. 1 million of them already exist. You don't get a badge or a certificate unless you complete. We discussed completion a second ago. 80% of people who take micro-credentials already have degrees. 75% of the courses are only available in English. And only 20% of employers say that they really are comfortable to recruit from micro-credentials because they don't really know what they're representing. A challenge with a lot of micro-credentials is they sit with traditional transcripts and they don't provide evidence. So micro-credentials at the moment almost compound the issues. They're not really solving anything. So what we've got at the moment is we've got two setting up a third core of literacy, to evolving the interrelatability of the learning of the classroom to the learning of the future. The current way of summative assessment, it's preventative to digital coming into core subjects because it's, it could be seen as a hindrance to teachers doing their jobs there. At the same time, there's a massive opportunity of making digital literacy core so that we can implement this formative and non-summative pathway, but that will stand at the end of education alongside the tests, and demonstrate and evidence what students have done throughout their learning, hopefully with a unified taxonomy. So what is our overarching opportunity here? Our overarching opportunity is to bring future-ready skills, bring digital skills. Remember, I mentioned digital skills as a combination of social, emotional, hard skills, values, into the core of learning. There's an economic mandate for it. There's an educational mandate for it. Bringing that through also gives us an opportunity to demonstrate new pathways of assessment at the same level that we currently hold our tested pathways. We're not having to break our social contract with the parents of our schools globally by saying, hey, we're going to get rid of that exam that you were relying on your child to do. But we can bring digital as the core. We can do that in a different way. And then we can give ourselves time also to think about maybe evolving other forms of learning with similar forms of assessment in the future. We're in a position like never before after the pandemic, where educators have been through an experience of considering data in learning more, considering different media. We've shown in the last 2 years that education can evolve, and it can evolve quite quickly. And so we've got this opportunity now to not only evolve our definition of core literacy, to make learning more relatable to the real world in the future, but also to potentially begin that process of long-term assessment. So I'd put it to you that digital needs to become a third core literacy. As educators, do not stress about becoming the greatest technologists in the world yourselves. Focus on the context. Understand the real world context of mathematics. Relate that through digital to the world outside. Where you're in digital technologies, or where you're wanting to teach digital technologies as a discrete discipline to your students, let them fail with the technology, but make sure that you are able to guide them on the way that they're solving problems with the context. Work as a community to move this envelope forward in a common use of language, describing what is learnt and understanding the connection, that is connected well to the outside world. This is not just an educational priority. This is an economic urgency. We are going to, if students aren't prepared with this contextual and digital skills knowledge, they'll fall foul of the automation gap. We will be compounding the challenges we're already facing about taking care of our communities and our societies in the future. So we've got an opportunity, but we've also got a major imperative here. But there's a huge upside to grasping that imperative, because where people go, we'll see greater social mobility. We need people to have higher disposable income because they're working in higher level jobs. We need every student coming out of education to be able to meet the demands of that workforce. We need to communicate between education and business. And in the long term, I think this my belief is that this redefinition of core literacy, this marriage between digital skills, numeracy, and language learning in the future is the gateway to evolving the assessment in our education systems. In Hong Kong, where we sit today, the education system, we have the money to invest in developing the learning communities, in the professional learning for the educators. There is already an expressed mandate within the education system. And so we need to find those ways. And like some of the suggestions, small bits, but again, context, relate the context, guide this, make the opportunity and prepare the students as early as possible to make their own decisions around technology. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation for today. I'm more than happy to take any questions that anyone would like to ask, and anybody that would like, I'm more than happy as well to share the presentation with you too.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. This is Mason again, and I'm not turning on my camera. We do have 2 questions here, one from the audience. So we have like a group of teachers listening to you, and we have really practical questions. When you were referring about like showing short videos to students related to to learn about the society. So where can we find them? You know, like we have a seed of like videos on YouTube, from them everywhere. So what's your tips? What's your recommendations?
Absolutely. So I would look at in a couple of ways. One of those ways is going to be looking for high quality sources that are covering these. When I go for these kind of videos, I look at the work of organizations like the McKinsey Global Institute. They are constantly outlaying video content. YouTube is also a fantastic source for this type of content. At the same time, another way is everyone who's an educator has friends who are in the world of work. And so another thing that you can do, and I genuinely do this with friends of mine who are in industries, is I say to them, hey, when you're doing something differently, or when you come across a time when you think, oh, wow, that was, I used to do something in one way, I've started doing it in a different way. This way has great implications in the future. I ask my friends simply to take a quick video for myself, or to show me something. You know, we're now so familiar in society of just, you know, it's just simple for a friend to grab a video on a phone, to share it with you as an educator, and for that to be something that can share across. A challenge with only looking at the videos that appear on, call it a YouTube, or that appear on a on a World Economic Forum, or a McKinsey Global Institute, or an Accenture, is they're very, very polished, and they often use language that is a very, very high level. And so just be aware of that. But also it's good for where you have other people that know, even where you as an educator, where you've seen something has changed in the way that something happens that you do on a daily basis, but it might be something as an adult you do, but not necessarily something that your students would do on a daily basis. Then, you know, maybe the way that you manage your banking, the way that you do that, then again, grab a quick video, share it with your students, but don't bother editing it. Don't bother cleaning it up. Okay. Because one of the challenges with that is students also need to be aware that You don't need millions of dollars of budget to do something that's highly constructive, highly valuable, very impactful very quickly. So go to your community, get information from your community, keep that quick, keep it simple. Go to the big boys, the McKinseys, the World Economic Forums, there. The other area that, again, has a major also multicultural angle for media, and these can be written resources as well as video resources, are the various different newspapers and global sites there. And what you can find often there is you can find that things that develop or technologies that have developed through the news, you can actually search for a report about something. Let's say it could be the way that financial technology works. You could look for a report about financial technology that was 10 years ago. What was a new financial technology then? And then look for something today. And so you could compare, and you could grab two clips from the Financial Times or from the New York Times, or in Hong Kong locally from any of the press, both the English-speaking press and the Chinese-speaking press. And then you can compare and contrast the development, but you can also look at the way that technologies are developing across different cultures, from the way that high quality media and news outlets are reporting about different types of growing technologies around the world. So those are some of the ways that I look to get these resources and bring them in. But yeah, never neglect the community and the people that you know who can provide you with that firsthand, those primary sources of information.
Yeah, thank you. Because the person raised these questions, want to know a bit about the topics and the examples that you have mentioned just now, like fintech, self-themed, probably videos in your community. What else? What other topics do you usually in class or in your school?
Yeah, so when I look at it, I think about, so I look for what is a route, because if you look for some of the outcome areas, sometimes it can get a bit overwhelming because you can end up with loads of stuff really quickly. So what I will sometimes relate back to is I might relate to three strands. Okay, I might relate to three strands of skill. One is about skill about creating content. Another one is about skill about design. And by design, I don't mean necessarily design which is about something that makes something look really nice. I mean design in terms of usability. And then the third thing I look at, questions about data and information there. And so what I would tie back to these three strands. And then I would say, okay, what are different industries doing about these three strands? And then when you search different industries, then you will find, I mean, the industries can be found as a list. So you've got obviously your traditional industries, and then outside of traditional industries, there is call it a cutting edge or an evolutionary arm to that industry. So you've got the finance industry, you've got fintech, you've got the logistics industry, you've got logistics technology, you've got the education industry, you've got educational technology. And it's, don't kind of necessarily worry that it's really more complicated than that. The world of business often uses very highfalutin or very complex language, but it's unnecessary. So any traditional industry that you can think of, if you search under that with simply the suffix of tech, then you will often bring up a lot of those new developments. But when you're reflecting on showing some of these and relating those back, I would recommend to think about those three core areas of content creation, usability or design, and data and analysis when you're doing that.
Thank you, Chris. I saw that we are running out of time, but I do have a question going back to your definition of digital skills. So hard skill, soft skill, and values, right? So it looks like that in normal local schools, when we teach ICT, for example, it looks like we focus more on hard skills, right? But we have to really have to juggle among the three bubbles, the three areas. So how do you think can you offer one tips, like one big tips to local teachers, how would you balance those three areas?
And one of the things I'm sure that, without being, call it fickle, the first, I wouldn't necessarily start at the end of the year saying I've got everything in balance. Don't put yourself under pressure to cram hard skills into students' minds. One of the reasons why is that whatever the hard skills that you're cramming into their minds now, they will evolve. Okay. The real thing is, when you're thinking about a set of skills, I would back solve the skills from the issues that are interesting to your students. So first, ask your students what they're most interested in. Then from there, think about teaching them some hard skills of technology that would enable them to critically think about some solutions for the issues that they're most interested in. Now, if you have a group of students that you know are not going to want to spend a huge amount of time learning, let's say, in design about Photoshop and Illustrator and fireworks and really getting into highly technical suites of design, then keep it simpler, but make sure that they understand the process behind design and give them a few options for them to self-study in their own time. So you might say, okay, we're going to work in PowerPoint in the class, heaven forbid. But then I'm going to say to my students, if you want to explore Figma, it will allow you to take your solution further. But then we're going to focus around solving that problem, and we're going to focus in working in teams. Don't be worried as well. If you've got a student that knows specific technical skills, give them room to really, if you like, to apply the full realm of those as part of a team, and have other students think, okay, how can we, in collaboration with this individual, do something that's just so much better and really benefit from that person's interests? And that is a huge demonstration on empathy, and it's also on soft skills and teamwork. So I would say the hard skills are only going to get bigger, they're only going to get more complicated, they're only going to get deeper. And finally, don't think that your role as an educator is to give the student every piece of information they need to go to the world. What you want to do really at its heart, because the area of digital skills is so big and so complicated, and they're going to have to continue learning about it, the best thing you can possibly do is keep it simple, keep it interesting, keep your students engaged. Do everything you can to keep them engaged, regardless of how little or how much depth that has. Keep them engaged by solving problems around their interests. That's the best possible foundation, with you as the core of context, that you will then let them go out into the world. They will spend thousands, tens of thousands of hours in the rest of their lives learning, and they've got plenty of time to continue to learn. You've got a mere snapshot, a mere drop in the ocean in the scope of their lives. So what you want to give them is that ability to continue, that platform to start from. And different types of schools have different resources, different interests of students in there. So don't get too stressed about the level of technical depth. Yeah, you balance it in a way that's appropriate for your students, and focus on engagement and context.
Thank you, Chris. So, and I have to wrap up now. And there's one particular comment from an audience, Ivy. Thank you, and which is the same as what I'm going to say. Is to hope that your message today will reach the education policy makers and the school leaders. So thanks, Chris, for today, and thanks to the rest of the audience. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good day. And remember to get your e-certificates from our system. Thank you. Bye-bye.